Well, thank you for having me here today. In today's paper, I want to talk about a virtually unknown chapter in the history of modern East Central Europe. At the end of the First World War, the multinational dynastic empires that ruled these areas collapsed in war and revolution. What would come next and how durable it would be remained open questions. In the territories of the former Habsburg monarchy, also known in its last years as Austria-Hungary, new nation-states emerged from the rubble of empire. Behind the formation of states like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Poland were the security concerns of the Western Allies and the lobbying of powerful nationalist groups. These forces converged to meet the challenge from the revolutionary communist left, which was growing in strength in the wake of the Russian Revolution. The specter of extreme right-wing counter-revolution stalked these lands too, particularly in Hungary and German Austria. But there was still another challenge that came from the war-stricken rural areas. I will argue that understanding this rural episode can help explain the fragility of the social political order in this part of Europe between the wars. The research I will present is mostly from the territories of what became Czechoslovakia, but it is relevant to all the former lands of the Habsburg monarchy. I begin with two scenes from 1918 that shed light on the topic of my paper today. The first took place in late summer in a Prague office where Major Jaroslav Rošicki drew up a secret 7-point action program aimed at securing Czechoslovak sovereignty before Austria-Hungary had actually collapsed. It was becoming increasingly clear that the Central Powers would lose the war and that an independent Czechoslovakia would arise. Pro-independence Czech political and military leaders prepared themselves for this. The Mafia, a conspiratorial group of Czech politicians in Prague, entrusted to Rošicki, a Czech officer still in the Habsburg army, the task of preparing militarily for a power seizure. Point 4 of the program, as Rošicki later recalled, was to, quote, organize the so-called green cadres, which were at that time forming in Moravian Slovatsko and in southern Bohemia, and were composed of military deserters from replacement regiments and from the field. These soldiers, armed and partially organized among themselves, would need leadership and financial support. Both of these tasks would be our responsibility, end quote. Point 4 was never fulfilled. Rošicki himself was very interested in the Green Cadres and wanted to see to this task personally. Some men from his regiment, whom he knew and valued as reliable and nationally conscious Czech soldiers, had deserted to this mysterious organization. But other tasks distracted him in the final months of the monarchy, and travel restrictions imposed on military personnel kept him from making his planned journey to southeast Moravia. The Green Cadres remained peripheral in the Czechoslovak national revolution that followed on October 28, 1918. And they did not figure much in the triumphal story of Czech liberation that emerged in the interwar years. Gradually, they sank into obscurity. It is unlikely, however, that Rošicki's plan for integrating the Green Cadres would have worked. This had less to do with indifference among Czech military and political leaders than it did with the fact that the cadres' own ideas of revolution did not fit with those of elites in Prague. This brings me to my second episode, which occurred in the small western Slovak parish of Nadaš, today Trstin, close to Trnava. Excited rumors began spreading on November 1st that the World War had ended. These were jubilantly confirmed on November 5th when the village received a printed copy of the Martin Declaration. This was the October 30th statement of intent by Slovak leaders to secede from Hungary and join an independent Czechoslovakia. Amidst the euphoria, the local priest, Martin Kolar, assembled a citizen militia to safeguard property and prevent anti-Jewish violence, which gripped much of Western and Central Slovakia during these days. But, according to eyewitness Wendelin Kristufek, one of the more respectable locals, the citizens could not prevent the orgy of looting and violence that arrived with the Green Cadre. The Green Cadre, he said, came from Moravia and was mostly tramps. They not only plundered Jews, but also the noblewoman Palfi, wife of the Austro-Hungarian emissary to the Vatican, and the landowner Ferdinand Krischer. They killed a man at the train station and were about to lynch the local notary, Geza Cederla, when some villagers intervened to stop the murder. Order was restored to the village only after November 9th, when the Czechoslovak Volunteer Army defeated Magyar units at Senica and pacified the district. These episodes describe two encounters with the mysterious and forgotten phenomenon of the Green Cadres. In 1918, this loose movement coalesced in rural areas of the Habsburg monarchy from bands of army deserters and disaffected peasants. In an apocalyptic climate of social disintegration brought on by hunger, disease, and mass death at the front, they rebelled against local authorities, from the imperial state to wealthy landlords. And they promised deliverance to the impoverished peasantry. Though at the center of the tumultuous collapse of empire across broad, mostly Slavic areas of East Central Europe, this movement remains virtually unknown in the historiography on the war. This is because it did not fit the nationalist narratives that legitimized the post-imperial successor states in the region, and because it did not possess any conventional political representation. We do not even know precisely where the appellation green came from. Authorities speculated that green simply referred to the forests where they camped. Looking at these episodes side by side also highlights two distinct modes of Green Cadres violence. One was militarily organized and manifest in resistance to military authorities. The other, rooted in age-old scenarios of messianic redemption, aimed at some kind of social revolution. Taken together or separately, these aspects of the Green Cadres raise questions about the ethnic national meaning of their actions, and these questions in particular would trouble observers after the war and the establishment of post-imperial successor states. The remainder of my paper explores these themes in more detail. First, regarding the military origins of the Green Cadres. Scholars have shown that Austria-Hungary collapsed internally before its front soldiers gave up fighting. Part of this internal collapse, however, was increasing insubordination in the army and inability to police the hinterland. Such problems were far more serious in Austria-Hungary than in other belligerent states, with the exception of Russia. This prompted the Habsburg military to devote more units to disciplining its hinterland than any other major power. Desertion was the main problem here. Many, but not all of the deserters were returnees from Russian internment. Following the October Revolution, the new Bolshevik government could no longer administer the POW camps, and by June 1918, over 500,000 Austro-Hungarian POWs, that is 1/4 of the 2 million taken prisoner by Russia, returned home before the conditions of their transfer had been finalized. Resentful of the poor treatment they received upon their return, militantly opposed to re-enlistment for front service, and often enthusiastic about the great revolution they had just witnessed, countless deserted. By mid-1918, the number of deserters at large in Austria-Hungary was probably in the hundreds of thousands. Those returnees that did not desert were far more likely to be insubordinate, and they played a central role in the mutinies that rocked the military from May to June 1918. Reports by spies among them sometimes confirmed revolutionary intentions. The number of these deserters that joined the Green Cadres is difficult to calculate. The movement was strongest in the South Slav lands, especially in Sirmia, on today's border between Croatia and Serbia, and in southern Croatia, Slavonia, and Dalmatia. The Green Cadres in this region alone may have counted around 60,000 armed men. In all their strongholds, they were organized militarily and relied on local populations for provisions and warnings about the movements of authorities with whom they often skirmished. Regarding their aims, we can discern a tension between the international composition of the Green Cadres and their inchoate national goals. In some places, as in the Trnovski forest on the territory of today's Slovenia, the Green Cadre resembled a democratic miniature version of the multinational state itself, with all nationalities represented. Likewise, in the Buchlov forest of eastern Moravia, the center of Green Cadre activity in the Czech lands, Magyar and German units sent on one occasion to liquidate the mostly Czech Green Cadres ended up joining them. As an émigré Czech newspaper reported, quote, "In this strange organization, which is militarily constituted and possesses machine guns, etc., they have achieved something that the Austrian government was never able to do. Czechs and other Slavs get along well with Germans and Magyars," end quote. Yet national aspirations cohabited with such inclusiveness. Andrej Zlobec, a young Slovene peasant soldier who joined the Trnovski cadre in summer 1918, captured this tension. He said, quote, "Here in the Green Cadre we all found our refuge. We were united by the desire to fight for the smaller homeland and not for sprawling old Austria," end quote. Zlobec had in mind a vague nationally defined homeland, but many others thought of it in more local terms. For them, the Green Cadre represented an expression of radical salvationist hopes emerging from a war-torn climate of social disintegration. They seemed to espouse an egalitarian peasant anarchism, the Protean version or vision of a world reborn and free of militarized oppression and suffering. Ethnic violence, when it did surface, was directed against the apparent ethnically marked exploiters of the rural common folk. It was these motifs that characterized the violent collapse of authority in many of the Habsburg lands, particularly in Croatia, Slavonia, and Galicia, but also in Slovakia and elsewhere. In Czech territories, where the state was stronger and the transfer of power from Habsburg Austria to Czechoslovakia much smoother, Green Cadre's violence was less dramatic. Immediately, perhaps encouraged by Major Rošitsky, the authorities tried to enlist them in the newly minted army. A November 5th, 1918 call published in a Moravian newspaper urged, quote, "Czech soldiers, deserters of the Green Cadres, report immediately to your respective supplementary commands. Give your strength willingly to serve the national army. Every individual is needed for the holy national cause. Do not tarry to work," end quote. This had mixed success in the long run. On the one hand, some former Green Cadres seemed to have joined the new army enthusiastically, giving the movement a positive charge in the nationalist view. Moreover, in the 1920s, Czech gendarmes who had surreptitiously helped the Green Cadre during the war were hailed as nationalist heroes, such as the honest Czech Růžička in Nový Bydgoszcz or the gendarme sergeant Barek in Železný Brod, who earned himself the affectionate nickname Green Daddy, or Zelení Tata. On the other hand, some resisted integration and all-state authority. Such rural anarchism often shaded into criminality. Newspapers reported sporadically through the post-war decade on criminal proceedings against former members of the Green Cadre, mostly in southern and eastern Moravia, whose violent and larcenous activities had not stopped at the war's end. The mystery that continued to shroud the Green Cadres in the interwar period prompted attempts to make sense of them in popular literature. Literature, among other things, was a useful arena for situating past and current events in meaningful narratives. And one of the most pressing cultural agendas of interwar Czechoslovakia was legitimizing the variant of Czech nationalism that dominated the young republic. Between 1927 and 1929, 2 novels and 1 theatrical play in Czech propagated the alleged Czech nationalist commitment of the Green Cadre. The fanciful plot lines conjured a cadre fiercely devoted to Czech or Slavic emancipation, struggling against natural enemies among Germans, Jews, Magyars, Austrian patriots, and Bolsheviks. And I should mention here that a Polish novel called Zielona Kadra by Jerzy Kosowski also appeared in 1927. Adolescent readers were encouraged to pick up Josef Pavel's book, which described the adventures of a young Ruthenian deserter named Mikhailo Bunchuk, who becomes leader of the local Green cadre and guardian of the destitute Ruthenian peasantry. The Green cadre appears here as a grassroots Slavic liberation movement opposed to Germans, Magyars, and Jews, all of which appear in this book as rather venomous creatures. In Jan Václav Rosulek's 1928 novel, the cadres appear as tragic but heroic Czech nationalist freedom fighters embarking on an ill-fated mission to liberate Prague. The book scorns Bolshevism and takes a chauvinistic stance towards virtually all other nationalities. The clearest attempt to hitch the cadres to the Czech nationalist wagon was Josef Liška Dodlebski's 1929 theatrical play, Zelená garda. The personification of national solidarity overcoming class differences is the egalitarian Czech nobleman Emil, who becomes the savior of simple local lads from the Green Guard while courting a poor cottager's daughter. He is the hero of October 28th by thwarting a bomb plot to kill the deserters by the evil pro-Austrian gendarme Vanyák. Hailing Emil as their savior, the local Green Guards eagerly submit to his command in the new Czechoslovak army. But literary attempts at nationalist co-optation had a powerful rejoinder in Michal Mareš's 1927 Zelená garda novel, which likely presented the more accurate picture based as it was on real events. Mareš, a left anarchist author who had fought with the Green cadres near Dačice in southwest Moravia, dedicated the book to his fallen friend Josef Holtzmann Přibyslavský, a member of the Green cadre shot dead by gendarmes in mid-October 1918, who also appears as a character in the novel. Přibyslavský, who comes to the area from Buchla Forest in far eastern Moravia, is described as one of the last victims of Austrian bestiality and a Czech revolutionary. Mareš's book rhapsodized about the great social revolutionary and national emancipatory mission of the Green cadre. Quote, "In the middle of the great sea of military discipline and bloody violence, there were those troops as small islands, unsettling the authorities and armed power in the hinterland, tireless and nameless heroes of national revolution and pioneers of the coming social upheaval, the propertyless poor and cottagers, the Green Guard." End quote. This national revolution was not nationally chauvinist. A South Bohemian German is among the cadres in this novel, for example. Neither does Mareš's Green Guard sanction the elite-led national revolution of October 28th. While the deserters joined the Czechoslovak army to defend the young republic in November 1918, conflicts immediately surfed between the egalitarian Greens and Czech officers inherited from the old regime. The novel ends on a bitter note as the protagonist Jan Luka reflects on the incomplete nature of the revolution and the sham democracy that allows old oppressors to simply trade their imperial badges for national rosettes. Ultimately, it is not a red revolution that Mareš's character wishes for as he expires alone, cold, and drunk in the forest, but a green one. In his last moments, he exults in the beauty of the forest and the color green, the color of hope. The dreams of the Czech Green cadre seem to have died, like Mareš's protagonist, in the forests in late autumn 1918. As elsewhere, they played little role in shaping the post-war political order, or so it seems. Yet the memory of the Green cadres survived at least through the next war. Some who had fighting experience with the cadres, like the Roma Josef Serinek, who also escaped from Lety concentration camp during the Second World War, became leaders of the anti-Nazi resistance. And one of the first Czech anti-Nazi partisan groups, active in the Hostinské vrchy of eastern Moravia, called itself the Green Cadre. The case of the Green Cadres offers important new insights into the fall of Austria-Hungary at the end of the First World War and how that transformed East Central European rural society. The uneasy position of peasants in the post-Habsburg successor states is one dimension of this. Perhaps the rural former Habsburg subjects who experienced the First World War as the blood-soaked end of the world and remembered the Green Cadres would sympathize with Josip Zidaric, a character in Slovenian author Ivan Zorec's 1923 novel, Zeleni Kader, who says, quote, "If only the peasants would realize their enormous strength, they would transform the world. There would be no wars," end quote. Yet, as I have shown, righteous violence featured prominently in the scattered and ultimately unsuccessful attempts by Green Cadres to shape the future, as it does in Zorec's story as well. This violence and the meaning imputed to it by radicalized peasants added an element of instability to the fledgling interwar societies from the beginning. The forgotten events of 1918 in East Central Europe, especially in the countryside, would cast a long shadow into the 20th century. It also seems likely that this unrest, like the threat of Bolshevism in the East, helped shape the countries that appeared on the map in 1918 and after. This is particularly striking in the case of Yugoslavia. The short-lived state of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, embattled by Green Cadres' violence, hastily agreed to union with a militarily more formidable Serbia in December 1918, just a month after it came into being. Finally, this case shows that we still need to push beyond the inherited myths of national unity to understand the interconnected and troubled history of this region. Many of these myths arose in 1918 in order to silence critics and meet threats to the new nation states. We would be well advised not to take their version of history for granted. Thank you.